What happens when silence lasts for 10 years and jealousy finally breaks it? For years, nothing was said. No public confessions, no dramatic headlines, just subtle glances, careful distance, and emotions quietly tucked away. But all of that changed the moment Songyun was seen standing close to another man, and suddenly Shukai was no longer silent. Tonight, we explore the emotional turning point that made fans ask one question louder than ever before. Was this the moment he finally decided to fight back for the love he never stopped feeling? For nearly 10 years, the connection between Shukai and Songyun existed in a quiet space where emotions were carefully managed rather than openly expressed. In an industry where visibility often determined survival, restraint became a form of self-protection. Both actors were building reputations, navigating contracts, public expectations, and the unspoken rule that personal feelings must never interfere with professional momentum. What audiences noticed, however, was not what was said, but what was avoided. Their interactions were polite yet charged with familiarity. They shared a history that never required explanation, but also never found its way into words. This kind of emotional restraint is not uncommon among public figures. Careers in entertainment often reward control, patience, and emotional discipline. Yet, over time, restraint can transform into quiet longing. For years, nothing appeared to move forward, but nothing truly disappeared either. The absence of confirmation did not erase the presence of feeling. Instead, it allowed it to mature silently, waiting for a moment strong enough to disrupt a decade of careful distance. The shift did not arrive with an announcement or a statement. It arrived through images that felt ordinary on the surface, yet powerful in implication. Songyun was seen standing beside a man late at night, close enough to invite interpretation, but distant enough to leave questions unanswered. In the modern media landscape, such moments rarely remain neutral. Context is often replaced by assumption, and timing becomes the narrative itself. For audiences, this was not merely about curiosity. It symbolized movement. It suggested that Songyun's life might be entering a new chapter, one that no longer paused in ambiguity. For Shukai, the moment carried a different weight. It confronted him with the possibility that silence, once safe, now carried a cost. Psychologists often describe emotional triggers, not as creators of feeling, but as revealers. This moment did not introduce jealousy. It uncovered clarity. It forced a confrontation with time, choice, and consequence. For the first time in years, remaining still was no longer an option disguised as patience. It was simply absence. Jealousy is frequently framed as insecurity, yet in emotional psychology, it often functions as awareness. What Shukai appeared to experience was not impulsive reaction, but recognition. Recognition that feelings once postponed do not fade simply because they are unspoken. Recognition that waiting, while noble in intention, can quietly become regret. Rather than responding with visible frustration or defensive behavior, his shift was internal first. Observers noticed reflection rather than reaction. In interviews, his tone softened. His language became contemplative, focused on timing, value, and emotional honesty. These were not accidental choices. In celebrity communication, words are curated carefully, often revealing intention without naming its source. Jealousy here did not lead to confrontation or competition. It led to resolve. It reframed the narrative from what if to what now. In doing so, it marked a turning point not defined by possession, but by responsibility. Responsibility to one's own feelings, and to the truth that avoidance can no longer protect what matters. This was not a loss of control. It was the beginning of courage, The transformation that followed was subtle but consistent. Shukai did not announce a change, he embodied one. Presence replaced absence. He appeared more frequently in shared professional spaces, not intrusively but intentionally. His engagement with the public became warmer, more grounded, less guarded. These shifts reflected a conscious recalibration of emotional posture. In the entertainment industry, where every appearance is scheduled and every interaction observed, intention is rarely accidental. Showing up carries meaning. It communicates willingness without forcing response. Rather than relying on dramatic gestures, Shukai chose consistency. He aligned himself closer to moments that mattered, conversations that resonated, and environments where connection could exist naturally. This approach reflected emotional maturity. It suggested an understanding that meaningful relationships cannot be reclaimed through urgency alone. They require patience paired with courage. Silence, once protective, had completed its purpose. What replaced it was not noise, but clarity. In choosing intentional presence over emotional distance, Shukai re-entered the narrative not as a figure from the past, but as someone prepared to participate fully in the present. What followed was not spectacle, but subtlety. In an age of grand public declarations, it was the smallest gestures that carried the most weight. A pause before answering questions about love. A look that lingered just long enough to suggest familiarity. A quiet moment of shared attention amid crowded spaces. Research into non-verbal communication shows that humans respond more strongly to consistency than intensity. Fans did not need confirmation because they recognized emotional language beyond words. These moments felt unperformed, which made them believable. They did not demand interpretation. They invited it. Such gestures suggested respect rather than pursuit. They communicated presence without pressure. Importantly, they allowed space for mutual agency. This approach stood in contrast to narratives of urgency or reclaiming. Instead, it reflected emotional intelligence. The power of these moments lay in their restraint. They acknowledged history without demanding its repetition. In doing so, they created a sense of authenticity that resonated deeply with audiences who value emotional sincerity over dramatic certainty. As clarity emerged regarding the man seen beside Songyun, public speculation gradually softened. The moment was recontextualized, but its impact remained. The misunderstanding itself was no longer the focus. What mattered was what had already changed. Shukai's internal decision had been made before explanations arrived. Narratives often shift not because facts change, but because perspective does. This was no longer a story about rivalry or loss. It had evolved into a reflection on timing and emotional readiness. The external situation simply illuminated what had been internally unresolved. In storytelling, such moments mark a transition from conflict to intention. The urgency faded, but commitment remained. Shukai's actions no longer appeared reactive. They felt grounded. By the time the public adjusted its interpretation, the emotional trajectory had already moved forward. This reinforced a powerful message. The most significant changes often occur quietly, before they are understood by anyone else. The story was no longer driven by speculation, but by choice. And that's why this moment matters. Not because of rumours, but because it reminds us that courage does not always arrive early. Sometimes it arrives exactly when we are ready to stop being silent. If you enjoyed this story-driven insight into celebrity emotions and unspoken moments, don't forget to subscribe to LVT-SHOWBIZ for more thoughtful, cinematic storytelling. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for supporting the channel. Until next time, stay curious and stay kind.